All right, yes, so welcome everyone to Tin Mountain's Nature Program series on this rainy April evening. Before I hand things over to tonight's presenter, I wanted to take a moment to first thank Tin Mountain's Nature Program series sponsors. They are Hancock Lumber, White Mountain Oil and Propane, and most recently Farm to Table Market down in West Ossipee. So we want to recognize them for their financial support that allow us to put on programming such as this. I also want to take a moment to thank all of you who are watching who are current members of Tin Mountain Conservation Center. Your membership dollars also go to help us fulfill our mission, which includes quality programming. So thank you for your support. If you're not a member of Tin Mountain, we would highly encourage you to consider doing so. And you can find membership and donation information right on Tin Mountain's website, tinmountain.org. I also want to put in, just mention a few of our upcoming programs. This upcoming week, we have on Wednesday evening, we have environmental trivia happening at Tuckerman Brewing in Conway. That starts at 5:30. You can come with your team or you can join a team when you get there, but a nice way to, to do some spring cleaning of the mind and stretch those, really exercise those mental muscles. There are some pretty great spring categories. I was being tested. Yes, they were being tested out on me earlier this week. So I can say there are some great questions that our staff is working on. And then the next evening, next Thursday, April 13th, in person at Tin Mountain's Nature Learning Center, we have a program on New Hampshire's timber rattlesnake population. So historically, timber rattlesnakes were, there were a number of populations in New Hampshire. There is currently only one population that is still in existence. And Brendan from New Hampshire Fish and Wildlife, who has been monitoring those rattlesnakes for a number of years, is going to present on that. So that's in person at the Nature Learning Center on next Thursday, the 13th. So some great programs that we have coming up, but we're very excited about this topic, especially since our presenter, Erin Holmes is not only the administrator of the Watershed Management Bureau for New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, but she is also she's also the hill climb event coordinator for Tin Mountain. So we're excited to be able to pull her in and and have her present as part of our nature program series. So we're excited to have Erin here wearing her DES hat. And presenting on all of the work that she's done with, with water management, as the presentation title, mentions, rowing in the same direction, looking at watershed management, and how we can all work together to improve and maintain, New Hampshire's water quality. A little bit different than some of our other evening programs. I would ask that you hold your questions, but Erin's presentation is broken into three main portions, and so she'll take questions after each one of those portions, so we can keep things sort of tied in with that content. But lots to go over, so I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Erin.
Great. All right, thumbs up, you can hear me. We're all unmuted. Excellent. Thanks, Nora. Yeah, I really appreciate being here tonight. And as Nora said, I am wearing my DES hat, as you can see from my background. And really, my purpose tonight is to just give you an overview of really all the programs, not all of the programs, but many of the programs we're managing at DES and the Watershed Management Bureau, and an understanding of some of the issues that we're really focused on and facing right now. Certainly, I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of these issues and are probably dealing with it maybe in your own communities. So certainly an opportunity to learn and to take away that information and really just start putting it into that broader perspective of the watershed approach of how we manage water quality in the state of New Hampshire. And so because this bureau is huge, I'm not going to be going into great depth on all the topics. I'm really going to focus on a couple of key that I'll go a little bit deeper dive into, but certainly, now I'm your resource. If you have questions, I can point you to my staff who certainly can answer anything and are very engaged in the communities as well. So I'm really just opening that door nice and wide, for you to reach out to DES if you do have any questions or concerns within your own community. So just a little kind of background on my trajectory of how I got here to watershed management. And I kind of have to do this thinking every now and then because I don't really know how I got here either. And I have to remind myself kind of where my roots were and why I'm doing this now. So I am a chemist as my undergrad education and an engineer through my master's. And I've worked in environmental laboratories doing all sorts of analyses and really just getting deep into the data and loved that work, but I wanted to do something else with it. So I went back to graduate school and went through the environmental engineering program at UNH for my master's. And with that, I really focused on environmental contaminated site management, remediation, and that was my private sector career, was cleaning up very large contaminated sites and doing a lot of active remediation for those, not just monitoring. So putting the chemistry and the engineering into practice. I came over to DES a couple of years ago in 2016, just looking for a change and to get out of consulting. And I came into their petroleum remediation program. So I focused on gasoline sites with USTs that had spilled, catastrophic events, and managed the groundwater quality side of things. A little bit of surface water impact, but it was mostly groundwater management. And then a new opportunity came to me where I became the first administrator of the Drinking Water and Groundwater Trust Fund at DES and for the state of New Hampshire, where we received about $300 million through a lawsuit with ExxonMobil, who made MTBE and contaminated plenty of groundwater wells. And many of you probably know that story well. And I worked in that role for about 4 years, managing the Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund. And then last summer, I moved from there to the Watershed Bureau Administrator. So I really walked into a world that I didn't focus on in my career. But what I like to say is I went from cleaning up the water to addressing and mitigating issues with drinking water to basically now I just get to control all the water in the state of New Hampshire. Anytime a drop of rain falls, it's mine. So I think it was kind of a clear trajectory that I went on. But really the story is I'm very new to this role. I'm bringing a lot of my expertise into it, and I'm learning a lot. So that's probably another reason why there's not a lot of depth to some of the topics I'm going to talk about, because I just haven't been focused on them yet. But certainly, if you do have questions, I'll try to answer it, or somebody else in my group I'm happy to put you in touch with. And then, as Nora said, I have another role where I do crazy things on bikes and ride in the rain for 75 miles across the state of New Hampshire, or do endurance mountain bike races and hike a lot. So that's really what kind of pulled me to Tin Mountain and taking this role as the event coordinator. So I just like being outside. So tonight's topics, I really want you to walk away with maybe a deeper understanding between watersheds and our human interactions with them. And, and again, an understanding of the relevant programs we have going on at DES. And then, what can we do about it? And, a lot of it is thinking about things in terms of water quality, about land use development. I know a lot of you folks are probably very versed in these same topics. And, I really want to be able to provide a resource to you and an understanding that we can go out into our communities and continue these conversations. And I know that's a big part of what Tin Mountain's mission is. So I think it aligns very well with the work that we do at DES. And so just to give you an understanding of what my group does at the Watershed Management Bureau, it's really quite diverse. We have the biology section, which I will talk about some of our monitoring programs. They are focused on biomonitoring. We do exotic invasive species for aquatic weeds. We manage the response to harmful algal blooms. We inspect beaches. We also inspect public bathing facilities within the biology group. And they're really the ones out there all summer with a team of interns going and collecting data on our rivers and lakes, and as well as our coastal and estuary areas. So we'll talk more about that monitoring. And then I have a water quality planning section, and this group of folks, they're more our regulatory arm. They manage the water quality standards. These are surface water quality standards, not the ambient groundwater quality standards. These are all surface water. They permit activities and certify them for water quality. We also do our federally mandated assessments of impaired waters, and we have a total maximum daily load program, which somebody that I talked to the other day described it as a diet plan for your lake, is, how to limit nutrients that might be impairing the lake. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Then we have the Watershed Assistance Group, and this is really our white hat group. So they have a couple of grants that they manage for watershed-based planning. Our stormwater team is also in here, and they're really technical advisors for municipalities that have to adhere to the stormwater permitting through the EPA, as well as really out in the community talking about this stormwater runoff and non-point source. We have a really cool program in there called Soak Up the Rain, and I've stolen a couple of their slides for tonight. That's really talking about, using gardens and rain gardens, green infrastructure to manage lakeside pollution that comes from runoff. And they do a lot of community outreach and training, teaching people how to build these. And it's just a great program if you like plants and being outside. We also run our assistance grants through here, and then we have a program that I'll talk a little bit more about called the Green Snow Program. That's to reduce road salt use and to basically help reduce the impairment of chloride in our lakes in New Hampshire and rivers and streams. And then finally, I'm gonna kind of shelve the New Hampshire coastal program a little bit. I have some slides at the end talking about coastal resiliency and some of the programs that we have with that. And if we get to it, I will certainly go through them. But I figured this might be more of a freshwater audience, so I wasn't going to spend too much time on all of the work that the coastal program does. But what I can say is they have a wide variety of projects as well. You can see in this list, we manage the shellfish program. So our role in there is water quality, but that water quality really translates into virus monitoring as well, and ensuring that there's public safety of the shellfish industry, basically. We also address coastal habitat restoration. We have a couple of salt marsh projects that happened early 2000s that we're continuing to monitor the restoration of that salt marsh over time. A significant amount of coordination with coastal management between regional partners, the university, Great Bay stewards, very, very engaged with my staff out on the coast. And then we also have this little project that we're using some federal funds from the American Rescue Plan Act to assess critical flood risk projects and address culverts. Again, it's sort of the tip of the spear on this climate adaptability and resiliency. One of those things is making sure culverts can manage the flows of these extreme storm events. So we have a group of folks working on those projects as well. So again, we don't just deal with watershed, we deal with all of the issues that are facing our communities in these watersheds, as well as the aquatic organisms, as well as the designated uses of these water bodies. And so it's a large variety of programs and projects, which I really like, but it's a little overwhelming your first week of work. And so the first topic I just want to kind of go through is some of the watershed management challenges that we're facing here at UN or at DES. And, I know we all know what a water cycle is, but just in case you don't, I think this is the best picture of a water cycle ever. You've got these happy little raindrops that are falling into the water body, and then they're waiting for that, transpiration of going back up with the sun into the clouds. And I'm not really sure why this little guy is apprehensive and afraid, but he's just going to hang out in the surface for now. But watersheds are taught in second grade. My daughter's figure didn't look like this. Hers looked more like this one. That other one is in my office. So just saying, I stare at it every day. But really, this is the watershed. We all know what's going on here. But, really what we're talking about in the management challenges of the watershed is what happens when we show up to the party as humans and we build some industry, we start using the land in different ways. This picture starts to become a little fuzzier, maybe a little more turbid with some silt in the water. And it's not the ideal situation. And if we want to start putting numbers on that, we can look at these kind of undeveloped forested areas and these streams. In these areas, if you get a rainfall, about half of that rainfall gets soaked in. So maybe it eventually makes it into a stream or it percolates into the groundwater over time, but 50% of it is kind of staying there. 10% is going to run off. And that's, again, your intermittent streams, your perennial streams flowing down in the watershed approach down to the larger rivers and streams into lakes. And then you've got about 40% that you're losing back up to transpiration and evaporation. But then what happens here when we go to a developed area? Again, I know this is not probably a new concept or a new issue that most of you don't understand, but I think the numbers again kind of show the picture. So here you've got from 50% down to 15% of this water soaking in. You've got 55% of it running off. Now we're going to remember that because that is what I'm going to talk a lot about is stormwater. And then 30% is going back up. And so that dynamic has changed a lot. And we start to see that now as water quality changes over time. And a great example of land use and watersheds, I really like this map, is between 1962 and then 1998. And this is Beaver Lake down in Derry, New Hampshire. So in those couple of decades, about 36 years or so, you can see the transition. So it's pretty impressive, right? 1962 still seems like a lot of land use, but around Beaver Lake, it's not that built up. You have some industrial usage there. There's a lot of agriculture around. Residential, obviously, building up around the lake. But then now you've got residential a lot further out. So that those drops of water that are now falling on this outer edge, they're not going into the natural ground. They're going across the pavement. They're not being soaked in again, and they're finding their way very quickly down to the water body. And so you can just see, this is one picture, but this is happening all over. We know this in New Hampshire, especially southern New Hampshire. There is large amounts of development. And, that is going to put a lot of stress on our watershed. And then again, challenging it, because what do we do here? There's already development done. We can't slow it down. We can't encourage the municipality to come up with better, land use or, growing in a more sustainable way. The horses left the barn. So a lot of the work we do is trying to go back and fix some of this and eliminate those sources of pollution after the fact. So again, if you can keep it, undeveloped, that's going to be the best case. But what do we do, and what are those challenges now that it's already developed? So yeah, there's just some more graphic pointing to things in there. Oh, lots of graphics. So why does all this land use talk matter? And this was actually one of my staff we were talking about this, that stormwater runoff causes or contributes to over 90% of the water pollution problems in New Hampshire. So the water quality issues that we're dealing with, 90% of them are coming because of the stormwater coming off the land, going over these, developed uses, and then landing in the lakes or in our rivers. And this stormwater issue starts to impact what people like to do and recreate in the lakes. It impacts the aquatic life integrity, which means it's going to impact fishing. We spend a lot of time assessing rivers to see what species have moved in and which species have moved out because of the water quality changes. And when you start to think about that, stormwater then becomes something that we need to fix. It's the higher hanging fruit. We talk a lot in our group about the Clean Water Act. When the Clean Water Act came in, wastewater treatment facilities that were dumping raw sewage had to now treat that raw sewage. Well, that point source is really minimized now. We're dealing with, Nora and I were talking about this, like PFAS and how to address that in a wastewater treatment facility. It's not raw sewage anymore. They have permits, they have to treat, and they have to upgrade, and there's lots of controls in place. But what seems to be missing in that equation is all the work that we've done with that. Now we're looking at stormwater has now become the greater culprit of our water quality issues in New Hampshire. And that fruit is a little bit harder to grab. It requires a little more involvement from the community. It requires people wanting to do something about it, wanting to manage the land that way, wanting to put in a rain garden to reduce their nutrient pollution from their beautiful lawn that's right up against the lake's edge. That's a little bit different of an animal than the EPA just telling you have to meet these limits. So it certainly is a big challenge for us. And a lot of the programs that we run are geared towards that outreach and finding the solutions to this 90% water pollution problem. And so, stormwater, I'm really simplifying it here. I think I had like 5 slides before, but I realized that would take me all night to talk about. So stormwater really gives you 2 major issues. You get a quantity issue, and then there's a quality issue. And the effects from too much water is, undersized culverts. You've got storm surges that we're starting to see as our extreme storms are increasing in severity and frequency. Plus, we talk about this a lot at DES, is aging infrastructure. A lot of the culverts were sized and built in the 60s and 70s. And, we see images like this around the state when we have big storms like the Mother's Day storm. I remember I couldn't get out of my apartment to work because all the roads that led out of Newmarket were caved in some level. Again, this is happening around the state. But what that does is it causes a lot of issues with our water quality. These storm events cause problems, putting the turbidity, putting the silt into the waterways and the rivers. You can see this is kind of a nasty picture here. It also impedes aquatic life passage. So really, physical, tangible issues when this happens, on top of the cost and the safety and the hazards that are caused by localized flooding. And then the other one, I kind of just touched upon it, is water quality. So when you've got runoff in the watershed, that's carrying the pollutants directly to our surface waters. And so basically any pollutant that's hanging around on the ground is going to be swept up and carried away. And in most cases, unless it's permitted or some, infrastructure designed system to manage stormwater, it's not going to be treated. So, there are technologies, we've seen permeable pavement, drainage swales, rain gardens and things like that. So there are a lot of ways when you're designing and developing a new land use to mitigate some of that water quality and those pollutants with different stormwater treatments. But still, at the end of the day, you can walk around a dirt road and see these little channels that are being built. You can probably follow this channel down into the woods and then watch where that turbidity is really flowing. And eventually you'll find where it's coming out. So, it's death by 1,000 cuts. The parking lot we can control and engineer, but what's going on the sides of these roads? And again, that 90% problem, how do we start cutting that down? How do we make it 30% of the problem? That's the way we should be thinking about these challenges, is not that it's insurmountable, but let's start chipping away and get the next level of the fruit that's hanging off the tree. And so just kind of giving, again, this all will kind of roll into the monitoring and some of the restoration work that we do. But, again, stormwater pollutants that are coming into our water bodies are very common. This is the first picture showing you, turbidity and silt. This is sediment that has probably come in from a variety of sources. And, again, there is no bad player culprit here. A dirt road along a lake, a construction site, building up a house on a riverside. All of these are opportunities for stormwater, and especially those big storm surges, to cause damage and send these sediments down into our waterways. But again, this could, you're coming from the loose and uncovered soil. You could be eroding a stream bank. And some of those negative effects can make the water just look murky and brown, which nobody really likes. But then it can smother the fish habitat as it settles onto the water body, the bottom of the body. That might make it harder for fish or other organisms to live or survive there. And then again, I'm going to talk about the pollutants, but it can be carrying those pollutants that might be absorbed to the sediment as well, which, now is a mobilized path right into the water. And another big one I'm going to touch upon a little bit later is nutrients. Again, we are all aware the benefits of nutrients for plant life, but when you start putting a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus into the water, there's a lot more concerns. Nutrients that are contained within the sediments can be washed right into the water body. I'm going to pick on the dirt roads again. Just because a lot of lakes and rivers have these beautiful, I'm a gravel cyclist. I love riding down beautiful gravel roads and noticing the beautiful little stream that's babbling next to me. And I'm not really thinking about how the impact of that road and what it can do to the water quality in those nearby streams and lakes. But that is a vector that is bringing nutrients with the sediment into the water. The most clear, I didn't put it forward. The most clear, obviously, are fertilizers. You've got a lot of this land development around in the watershed. People like their bright green lawns. I am not that good with a lawn, but they're applying fertilizers, and those do find their way into the water. And then obviously another culprit is your septic systems, these aging or undersized septic systems or wastewater plants, providing larger amounts of nutrients than they can handle and putting those back out into the watershed. And so these excess nutrients, they're going to cause a lot of plant growth, and that's just going to become a problem, because then the plants will decay and then they'll feed other bacteria, and they just start to become a nuisance for boating and swimming. And I'll talk about a little bit further. They have other, scarier implications, like leading to cyanobacteria and harmful algal blooms. And so, again, as these plants that have now had a happy life with all the nutrients, they start decaying, they start utilizing the oxygen. And in our monitoring, we start seeing, DO levels decreasing in our water bodies. And that's going to lead to a whole bunch of things that aren't good, and, really harming the aquatic life within that water body because of that lack of oxygen. And then, again, some of the pathogens you might see in your local community to pick up your dog waste or your pet waste, that's an effort to get pathogens out of the stormwater, and so they're not going into our water bodies as well. So that is another concern with our stormwater pollutants. And then we have just good old fashioned toxic contaminants. So this could be, a contaminated site that they're remediating and digging, and they have bad stormwater controls around the site. This could be chemicals, pesticides, automobile fluids, again, in that watershed view, what are the industrial entities in there? What are they doing? What types of chemicals are they using? And obviously, sometimes the practices aren't as best and clean and environmentally friendly. And so again, those contaminants can easily end up in the water bodies. And then I know, talking to Nora, one of the things that is very concerning, I think, for a lot of people in New Hampshire is PFAS. And I will touch a little bit upon PFAS and what we're doing in our water quality standards, but I do have a pretty strong background, having done drinking water, to answer questions on PFAS as well. But in the watershed, PFAS gets into the environment in the southern part of New Hampshire. We had air deposition that extended all pretty far in southern New Hampshire. Obviously, that PFAS is now in the surface waters and in the environment on top, as well as the groundwater and in the soils. And so we are actively looking at soil standards for PFAS. And again, thinking about these stormwater pollutants and the pollutants that are going to run into our water bodies. PFAS is going to be in there if it's deposited into the soils. We also have ongoing research that we're looking at PFAS impacts on loon eggs, and we're doing that with the Loon Conservation Society. So, again, we're still trying to take the things out of this Pandora's box of PFAS, and we're still learning quite a bit when it comes to that contaminant. And another, another challenge that we have is chlorides and really road de-icing agents. And so I wanted to add this pollutant to the list because a lot of us deal with winter maintenance. The municipalities, you might be a winter maintenance contractor. We all know the challenges of, the changing climate. We have more ice to address than we had before. It's not so easy. And actually, de-icing and winter management is very technical, and so much so that UNH has a program and they certify for this. And what we found was in New Hampshire, through quite an extensive amount of research and studies along the 93 corridor, realizing there's quite a bit of chloride impairments in the water bodies there. And we started looking a little bit bigger and broader at this issue. And through our work, we realized that parking lots are contributing about 50% of the chlorides in the environment. Chlorides can do a number of things to the environment and aquatic life. Drinking water, I have dealt with and provided funding for municipalities that have public water supplies that are nowhere near the coast, that have salt contamination, being close to 93 or heavily salted areas. We also see the impacts of chloride at low levels. It can really affect aquatic life structure and then the diversity and productivity of that life. It's toxic to fish, aquatic organisms, and amphibians. So really, getting that chloride out of the environment or significantly reduce it is going to be beneficial. We also see the impacts of chloride in streams, lakes, and wetlands and harming our aquatic vegetation. It can kill plants and trees along the roadside. So think about those riparian buffers now. You've got maybe a buffer along this beautiful gravel road that I'm riding down, but it's starting to be whittled away through long-term chloride use and the impacts of that. So, it's not just, in the water, our drinking water, it's not just affecting these organisms. It really has a larger damage effect on the watershed as a whole. And again, if you are salting that gravel road, the salt will get stored in that sediment. It's going to be, here it talks about it. It can retain water. It can lead to more breakdown and erosion of the sediment, all contributing to those larger water quality challenges in the watershed. And then, wildlife, we talk about it. And I mean, I think you've all seen the warnings on the salt for your driveway, talking about your pets and their paws. So, that same thing happens out in the environment as well. And then, the end of the line is just our infrastructure. Continued and excessive use of salt can really start to damage our infrastructure, which leads to increasing maintenance and those costs. And then agriculture. So now that we've kind of gone over a lot of the stormwater stuff and talked about some of these pollutants and the challenges, I just wanted to take a step back and talk about how land use along with stormwater can quickly age our lakes and ponds. And I'm just gonna say, I will not take credit for this next slide. It was my staff, but it's kind of brilliant. So how do you want your lakes to age? You could age like Jennifer Aniston. I think she's like, what, 85 in this picture? No, I'm just kidding. She's somewhere in her late 50s. Or you can age like Mick Jagger. And so, if we take care of ourselves and we manage our lakes and our ponds and our rivers, and we take care of them, they end up, aging a little more gracefully than if we really abuse them. We ignore the signs and the troubles of this land use. We recognize development is going to happen, but we don't try to start creating ways to mitigate that stormwater runoff. It is a very complex thing to talk about protection and restoration, but we have to understand what's going on. And again, I think Nora could probably do these slides better than I can, certainly folks in the audience, but when we're talking about aging lakes, we're talking about eutrophication, and it's a natural process that happens over a very long period of time. And, you've got sort of all these inputs. You've got nutrients, you've got algae, things growing, things dying, everybody's healthy, and the system works. But what we're talking about when we're talking about watershed management challenges is we're pressing on different parts of this system. We're taxing it. We're over, putting too many nutrients in the water body that it really just can't handle it. And so over centuries, you get this kind of natural eutrophication of the water body. And, there's Jennifer Aniston after centuries, she still looks fabulous. And then you've got really what's more likely happening is you've got decades of mismanagement within the watershed, and we've got development. We have all these influences on the balance of the natural eutrophication that is then driving this system to age a lot quicker, like Mick Jagger. So, that's just a little take-home visual as you go back out in the community and you're talking about, eutrophication and aging of lakes. Just remember this visual. I don't know if Nora's like shocked by that picture or not. So one of the, and I put this in the description to Nora, one of the big things that we're dealing with at DES and addressing within my group is cyanobacteria, really harmful algal blooms. And I put the contact on here. Kate Langley Hastings is from UNH. She works with us full time now. She's our HAB coordinator and really the one out there in the field and testing. And I'll talk a little bit more about our monitoring and response as far as cyanobacteria. But Kate is the person. So I know enough to go through these slides, but Kate is the real genius behind it. So cyanobacteria blooms, they used to be called blue-green algae, but now we call them cyanobacteria. They are displeasing to see. They smell, you definitely don't want to be tasting them, and they can be potentially toxic to animals, pets, and humans. And I put potentially because we'll talk about that in a little bit later. But if you haven't seen a cyanobacteria bloom, it may look something like this, but I'll show you another slide that it may not. It may look like many, many other things. But really, this is what you're starting to see on our lakes. And we are seeing the number of reports and sightings of cyanobacteria starting to increase. We have more samples to confirm. They're over some of our advisory levels. And it's starting to become this aesthetic problem in New Hampshire, where we are getting lots of phone calls when people see this. We're getting property owners, second homeowners wanting to try all manners as of pixie dust, or that I like to call it, to try to mitigate it within their front. We've seen neighbors putting fans in the water to blow it over to their other neighbors. So this is becoming an issue, and all of those things require wetlands permits. So please do not try to do it without coming to DES first. But you know, we're really learning a lot about it, and it's just becoming more and more apparent. There are some lakes that bloom all summer, and that is awful, right? You move on this beautiful lake and it's yellow and green and you can't swim in it. So it's starting to become a problem that we're now moving from response to actually starting to come up with a plan of what are we going to do about this. And so I will talk about this a little bit later. Cyanobacteria, you know, is very challenging because it can produce many different toxins, and they're collectively referred to as cyanotoxins. Those cyanotoxins can be consumed into the food chain, and then they're released into the water when the cells die. And one of the things I like to say is cyanobacteria is not cool. And there's my visual for cyanobacteria. I have another word that I call it, which might not be appropriate in a presentation of professional nature, but cyanobacteria is a jerk. Sometimes the toxins are there, sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's floating, sometimes it's in the water column, sometimes it looks like this, sometimes it looks like that, which makes management and addressing it really, really difficult. So there's no one toxin that we can point to. There are tests for some of them, but blooms can produce very little to no toxins, but then later, maybe even that same week, it starts producing large concentrations of toxins. So really, that's why it's just not cool. And it's my other, you know, inappropriate expletive is what I call it, which makes the staff laugh because it's very hard to manage and respond to that. And it's very hard to educate the public to that. And so that is certainly one of our bigger challenges with this is we can't tell you by looking at it if it's toxic or not, but we can tell you probably don't want to go in that water. Cyanobacteria can cause acute and chronic illnesses. Certainly there's a big risk to pets because where you who are walking by the water might think that's disgusting, you all know your dog might just want to run in there and start licking it and drinking the water. And so, you know, it is toxic and it's harmful to our liver, kidneys, central nervous system. It also can be in the air, which again is why it's not cool. And so it can irritate our skin and mucous membranes as well. It's also a growing concern in drinking water. In New Hampshire, we have over 30 public water supplies that rely on surface water, and EPA is now recognized this as an emerging contaminant. So that just shows you that the breadth of what this little bacteria is causing and the issues in the state of New Hampshire. And we are actively engaged in trying to figure out what are we going to do about this. So what are we going to do about it? One of the biggest things about cyanobacteria is it loves nutrients, and it really does like phosphorus. But I pulled this quote off of the EPA's website, and the link is down here with one of their issues talking about nutrient pollution. And this really does go to all of the things that I'm talking about, is that too much nitrogen and phosphorus can cause algae to grow faster than the ecosystems can handle in those natural ecosystems. Significant increases in algae harm the water quality, the food resources, habitats, that M is wrong, and then decrease oxygen that fish and other aquatic life need to survive. So there is no mystery of the connection with impairing and deteriorating water quality and the level of nutrients that these water bodies are not really capable of dealing with. And then for cyanobacteria, we talk a lot about phosphorus. Phosphorus, again, can be naturally occurring. It might be in the sediment, but there is a whole bunch of ways that phosphorus can be entering the water body. And, as we're learning more and more about cyanobacteria, there is a bright line between phosphorus and cyano. And so now the question is, how do we start dealing with this? If we reduce phosphorus, can we start seeing less blooms on a water body? And so these high levels of phosphorus can exist in the lake sediment. They can be brought in from our human interactions. So septic systems, fertilizers, urban runoff from leaf litter, soil particles in the dirt roads. All of these are contributing to this issue of nutrient loading in our water cycle. And so, okay, I'm looking at the time. I feel like this is taking a really long time. How am I doing, Nora? Are there any questions? No.
Okay. No, I would just keep, I would keep going, but you're doing fabulous.
Okay, so I'm going to go quickly. So monitoring, and really this monitoring is a place where my group we do the monitoring. We are out there in force all summer, and then fall, winter, and spring, depending on the year. And so certainly if I was going to give a call to arms to the folks listening to this, it would be getting involved with our volunteer programs. And then for Tin Mountain and their education, certainly there's an avenue here to do monitoring as well. And I'll talk a little bit about our quality assurance that we need people to follow. But what are we out there monitoring? So we're monitoring over 8,000 assessment units in New Hampshire, as you can see. Thousands of miles of rivers and streams, acres and acres of lakes and ponds. And while we may not hit every single one every year, this is what we're dealing with when we talk about monitoring in our programs, are these large numbers. We're monitoring for a large list of water quality parameters. Some of our water bodies might have continuous monitoring going on. They might have flow monitoring. They might be just snapshots, instantaneous. We're out in the field grabbing our DO measurements. But again, we are out there in the summer collecting all of this data. And so this is what we're monitoring for. But really, what do we do with all this data? So we get lots and lots of data, and we make it available for the public in a variety of ways. There's a lot of different utility and uses on our website and our databases. Sometimes we get called by maybe Tin Mountain that says, hey, what is all your river data for this river nearby? We want to do a project. We would respond and we would give Tin Mountain all of the data for that location. But what we do with it is really kind of our regulatory driver, and we have to assess water quality throughout the state every 2 years. And this is what we call the 305B, 303D sections of the Clean Water Act. And what this is it takes all of this assessment data, we develop a way that we analyze it, and then we spit out this listing. And then that listing is how we kind of categorize all of the water. And so in that listing, the 305B is the assessments. We can give somebody a good green light, category 2. Category 3 means not enough data, but it's not a huge problem. Category 5, and I don't know why this jumped to category 5, is the parameters of pollutant that requires a TMDL. So mercury, chloride, phosphorus, PFOS, those are all parameters that could be a pollutant that causes the requirement for a total maximum daily load, or that diet for the watershed. And then category 4 is like, we're not really sure what's going on there. We might need some new data. It's not causing an impairment. But if you're in a category 4 for a water body, you're not super happy, but you're not at category 5 yet. That is actually going to require something to happen for that. And so this category 5 is what we call the 303D list. It's like the naughty list. These are the water bodies that are impaired for some parameter or another. So that's sort of like one part of the monitoring. That's our assessment. And I do have a link if you want in the slides to that. But some of the more active things that you might see that we do is the summer beach monitoring. And so this is our team. They're going out there to sample for fecal coliform, different fecal indicator bacteria to see how the levels are at our public beaches. As you can imagine, there are a lot of water bodies and a lot of beaches in New Hampshire. We don't have enough staff to do every single one every day. And so really what we focus on are the coastal beaches and then between 60 and 65 freshwater beaches. And we hit the state parks a couple times a month. Try telling the governor you need to shut down a pretty busy state park on 4th of July weekend. That is never goes over well. And I felt like we were the officer from Jaws trying to close the beach on July 4th weekend. So, again, this huge impacts to the economics of New Hampshire. And so we have to be out there monitoring. We have to make sure people are in the water are safe, but we have to do it within reason because I don't have 100 staff monitoring these beaches every day. And then we hit the other most freshwater beaches during the swimming period about 1 time per month. And I just want to show, like, this is kind of cool. I put the link here and there's a picture, but we have this active beach mapper that in the summertime, you can say, I'm going to go over to Wentworth State Beach. So beautiful. And it would tell you if there is any active advisories on that beach. So again, this is a really good tool for, second homeowners, renters who might be renting their property, just general recreation, outreach into your community to see what's going on as the summertime comes. And then another critical program we have is our volunteer river assessment program and our volunteer lakes. With over 8,000 assessment units in the state, we can't do it alone. And we rely on these volunteer groups to basically assist us in evaluating water quality throughout the state. And so this is just some, I'm going to skip through these for time, Nora. But for every water body, we come up with like a really cool report for the volunteer group that's working on that one. I pulled this one from Sandwich. This is the Bear Camp Pond. Active VLAP group working there, and basically getting lots of lake information. I think this one is talking about these kind of stop traffic lights to the water quality data. So getting involved in the VLAP or the VRAP program is a really great way for you to become intimate with the water quality in the lake that you really love and recreate. And you can see we provide historical data in these reports. So very comprehensive program, and it's been going on for a long time, since 1985 for the lake program, 1998 for the rivers. And then I have another link in here. This is our lake information mapper. Really cool as well. Again, we got lots and lots of data at the state of New Hampshire because we spend most of our time out sampling. But I went into here and I was looking at, I think this is Ossipee Lake. So you can go to this mapper and you can look up all sorts of information. Does it have a TMDL? Yes, it does for mercury and bacteria and acid. What's its cyanobacteria bloom history? Really good to know. Are there fish consumption issues? So this lake mapper is really our outside facing tool that anybody in New Hampshire can look at. Really important to get a snapshot on what is going on in our water bodies. We're working on one for rivers. We don't have one yet, but the lake mapper is there. So cyano, I'm just going to kind of gloss over this one really quickly. The most important thing you need to understand about cyanobacteria is our program for the public is a response-based. We do not routine monitoring for it. We have one HAB coordinator that deals with this. We rely on reports of blooms from the public, lake associations, DES staff that might be driving by, and of course, those very valuable VLAP, VRAP, or weed watchers groups. A group like Tin Mountain Conservation Center, you are very informed. You're involved with Tin Mountain because you want to be good environmental stewards. You are our eyes and boots on the ground, especially when it comes to cyano monitoring. So we don't have long-term trend data for the entire state of New Hampshire. We have snapshots on some water bodies. So we know if this one water body has had cyano for the last 25 years, we probably have been monitoring it, but otherwise, that small lake or river or something that you might not go to all the time, we have less data. So we really don't have a good a good whole grasp on how climate change, land use, all of these things that we're talking about are really changing the frequency and duration of these cyanobacteria blooms, unless we're actively involved. And so I just, again, we have this sort of, observation reporting. We do some analysis, but you have to get a sample. So again, we might get a report from 3 different lakes on a Friday. We have to get a volunteer or staff person to go and collect a sample, bring it back to the lab and look at these nasty little critters, and then determine if we need to issue an advisory. And I'm just going to go quickly again through here. But we do issue advisories. They are whole lake advisories. So, again, this is what cyano looks like. It's got many different faces. It can look like pollen on the shore. It can look like this black tar bacteria. It can look blue-green. It's pretty nasty. And so because of our limitations to sample and provide instantaneous data and information on that, it really is up to the public to know what to look for and then avoid it. I like to say it's like a great white shark when you're in Sausalito and surfing in California. There's a sign that says there's sharks there. They may not be here today, but they might be here tomorrow. So you should just look and see if there's a shark. Same with cyanobacteria. Look before you jump in the water. If it looks like this, probably don't go in. Probably should be reporting it to DES so we can get out there. But it really is up to the public to be aware and understand the risks and then make these judgment calls. But it's also up to us to make sure we're outreaching so that the public knows what to do when they see one of these. Okay, I'm going to gloss over some of our, I was, kind of moving into some of our protection and restoration programs. I sort of touched upon a lot of this throughout the presentation, and I do want to kind of wrap up here, Nora. So, a lot of what we do, this is more kind of the nuts and bolts. We review and update our water quality standards. These are the surface water quality standards. These drive the permitting in New Hampshire for wastewater treatment facilities, any type of activity, land development, things like that. They all link back to our water quality standards. We're going through the process right now to update them, and we will be including PFAS limits. And this is for locations within 20 miles upstream of a public water supply. Really, this is talking about the Merrimack River, where you have wastewater treatment facilities discharging into the Merrimack, and then you have public water supplies pulling from the Merrimack. You want to make sure there's some level of control and that these limits, we're not making the problems worse for our neighbors downstream. Now, again, those rivers just cross through multiple municipalities and everybody has a use for them. So who's using all of these standards? We go through our assessment program, permitting, and a lot of the other permitting programs in the state. We also have these things called water quality certification. So again, this is talking about protection and restoration. Large activities and small activities have to be certified that they're not going to cause a problem to the water. And so our water quality certification program that's managed through my group, we provide a water quality cert to a project, and those certs include enforceable conditions that the activity has to ensure compliance with surface water quality standards. So that connection of, really understanding the water quality of that water body, that the activity, like a road realignment along the Ammonoosuc. A project like that would have to come in and they would have to get certified that they're not going to cause a problem when they're doing this work. And so that is all linked back to our water quality standards. And then we would say things like your stormwater controls need to be, within the specs of this design. You have to follow this to make sure that you're not creating, these stream pathways when there's a heavy rainfall. All of those things to help and make sure that these activities are minimizing their impact to the environment. I talked a little bit about the chloride issue and mentioned the Green Snow program. This is a voluntary winter maintenance program. And so right now it's going for contractors, and it's a commercial program. And what these certified contractors get is they get a limited liability protection with this. So if they're certified within our program, they get this other protection on top of it for basically because they're going to be minimizing the use of salt, and they're going to be smarter in how and when they need to use it and what type of salt, whether it's a brine or straight salt sand, to apply. So this program has been going on for over a decade. It is extremely successful. We have over 500 contractors. So again, call to arms for the folks on this call. Ask your plow guy if they are certified. Ask the contracting company that manages your business in the parking lots. Parking lots are 50% of the problem of chloride. Let's try to make sure we're using the ones who really want to be salt smart when they're doing this winter maintenance. And then our next step is we're working on rules for municipalities as well. Again, this is a volunteer program, but you can imagine if you're managing your salt better, you're saving money. So a municipality is kind of like this. But it also speaks to the contractors that maybe a smaller municipality might be hiring, is making sure that they're being salt smart. And then I'm going to just probably touch upon cyanobacteria. So right now we are working on a plan to prevent and control cyanobacteria blooms in New Hampshire. This is a directive that came right from the legislature during the 2022 session in House Bill 1066, that we, DES, have to prepare a plan relative to cyanobacteria blooms in New Hampshire. So this is ongoing right now. Our due date for that is November of 2023. We've been working with an advisory committee with a large number of stakeholders from New Hampshire Realtors, New Hampshire Lakes, New Hampshire River Council, UNH Expertise, New Hampshire Society of Veterinarians. Really the first time all of these stakeholders are getting together and talking about this issue of cyanobacteria and what are we going to do with it. And again, we talk about prevention and planning. There's watershed planning, and then there's in-lake management. And the watershed planning is talking about reducing those impacts from the pollutants in our watershed that feed cyanobacteria. And so we do have a couple of funding programs. One of them is our water quality planning grants. These are for planning only. We get a lot of lake associations that may apply for this, in different types of organizations that will come in for these planning grants. We have watershed assistance grants. Again, putting out funding that does require some match. Match can be in kind, so there's a lot of work that can be done that can be considered match. But again, we have about 500,000 per year to administer those grants. And then if you're going to go for big numbers, a local municipality that might fully encompass a watershed might look at doing some stormwater controls within their watershed, and they can get up to 100,000 in loan forgiveness to develop watershed plans and implement infrastructure. And so this is just an example of some great ones: Squam Lake, Lake Warren, Lake Wentworth, and these are all examples of watershed-based plans we have. And the purpose of that is just like, let's see what's going on in the watershed and let's start mitigating that. Let's take that 90% and see if we can bring that pollutant problem down to 50% from the stormwater, or 40%. How do we go about really protecting that water resource that we have for both, recreational designated uses and aquatic life? And so, this is really the active piece, and that DES can preach all day long about how important it is to manage your watershed, but we really need these groups and organizations, conservation commissions, municipalities, to go in and actually put some work and put this stuff into practice. I'm just looking, okay, I'm not going to do coastal resiliency. So again, I'm just going to nail the point home. There's over $1 billion in needs identified in a watershed needs assessment that was done last fall. This was surveying all the municipalities in the state. However, only 45 actually responded. But what we do is we take those 45, we group them into different municipality sizes, and then we extrapolate based on those needs what the whole state would need. And I think it is actually over $1 billion, but we're still finalizing the estimate. But we looked at stormwater infrastructure, hydro modification, so that could be culverts, dams, culvert replacements, stream crossings. We looked at green infrastructure needs, and then publicly owned treatment facilities. And then finally, super fun stuff is the in-stream flow program that my guys would murder me if I don't talk about.